don't think I'm going to use the step stool. I'm going to slide it. That's the strong, right? The verses said, "For when I am weak," I think we missed a couple of the verses. So I'm going to read, "But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on us. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, persecutions, and difficulties, for when I am weak, then I am strong." For when I am weak, then I am strong. This is one of those kingdom of God principles that we see in Scripture. Others might include, the last will be first. We are exalted by being humble. We find by losing. We live by dying. They are countercultural and challenge us as we are called to live out our life of faith as our guide. I have absolutely no idea when Pastor Bill might consider retirement, so please don't take this as an inside scoop, okay? But sometime in the far, far, far off future, the church, you will be faced with the task of finding a new pastor. Let me read a possible resume and tell me if you would honestly consider this as a pastoral candidate. Dear church, I understand that your pulpit is vacant. I would like to apply for this position. I have many qualifications. I've been a preacher with much success and have also had some success as a writer. Others say that I'm a good organizer. I have been a strong leader in most places that I have been. I am, however, over 51 years of age. I should note, too, that I have never preached in one place more than 3 years, and in some places I've been forced to leave town because I have caused riots. I have also been in jail 3 or 4 times, but not because of any real wrongdoing on my part. My health isn't good, but I'm still productive. The churches I have preached in have been on the small size, but some have been located in cosmopolitan areas. I have had difficulty getting along with other religious leaders in the area. In fact, some have threatened me, and I have been, on occasion, attacked physically. I'm not so good either at keeping records, and I have been known on occasion to forget whom I've baptized. However, if you can use me, I will do my very best. I sure hope that I'm not too late to be considered. Sincerely. So what do you think? Would you hire this person as a pastoral candidate? Some of you may have already guessed who signed the letter, the Apostle Paul. Our opinions about what makes someone successful have been tainted by our modern worldview. And the message we hear is that power, wealth, position are all you need. The focus in our culture is on popularity, intellect, beauty, and the winner. We've elevated to icon status athletes, celebrities, and even politicians. And this is true even in our church culture. We struggle with the underdog and the underachiever, don't we? Would we really hire someone who was ill frequently and doesn't get along with other leaders in the community? The passages that were read this morning will turn our ideas about success on its head and really challenge how we view weakness in light of God's power. In 2 Corinthians 12, the Apostle Paul here, his passage here, he is defending the authenticity of his leadership by appealing to his weakness, not his miracles or visions or ministry success. Weak is the new strong. This is the kingdom principle and the biblical worldview that Paul is asking us to all embrace. But before we go there, and I unpack that a little bit for our lives, I want to give you some historical background, the context of this passage. Scholars believe that the Apostle Paul founded the Corinth church around 50-52 AD. Corinth was a cosmopolitan city. It was on the sea, so it was a seaport, and it was multicultural and heavily influenced by the worship of the Greek goddess Aphrodite. The NIV commentator Gordon Fee notes that Corinth was densely populated and sexually cut loose from the traditional moorings. Some even estimate that Aphrodite cult prostitutes numbered in the thousands, at least 1,000. Fee goes on to describe Corinth as a combination of New York City, Las Vegas, and LA. Must have been quite a place to plant a church, right? But after Paul established the church in Corinth, he traveled on to Ephesus. And it wasn't long after Paul left that troubles began brewing in that fledgling church. And many of these conflicts are addressed in Paul's letter to the Corinthians, which we now have in the books of 1st and 2nd Corinthians. At the time of this particular passage, Paul is trying to address a threat to his ministry from the super apostles, which he makes reference to in chapter 11, the chapter just before this. These leaders had come to criticize Paul's leadership, and they were gradually drawing the Corinthians' loyalty away from Christ and towards themselves. And this grieved Paul and angered him. And yet he does not defend himself with boasting or with bragging or, puffing himself up in this letter. Instead, he knows that his true witness is what God has done in and through him. He knew that the success of his ministry did not depend on his ability or his greatness, but solely on the power of Christ. In verse 7, we learn that Satan was allowed to torment Paul with a thorn in his flesh. What this physical or even emotional limitation was for Paul has been debated over the years by biblical scholars. There's a whole range. If you look this up, there's a whole range of suggestions. Partial blindness, epilepsy, a speech defect, mental illness, or possible, which could have led to depression. Others suggest the agony of the people opposing him could have been the source of this torment, this thorn. We think about the phrase we use, they're a thorn in my side, right? We say that. The Greek word is skalops, which means a pointed stake or spike. Picture in your mind a tent stake. That's the idea of what Paul was dealing with physically, mentally, and spiritually. It wasn't just some splinter under his fingernail. And he called it a messenger from Satan who was sent to torment. And the Greek word used here, torment, is the same word that's used in Matthew to describe the Roman soldiers beating Jesus. Satan was seeking to destroy Paul, his ministry, and his hope and confidence in God's goodness and faithfulness. And yet, he does not do that. Satan didn't do that. But instead, Paul leans into and learns something about God's principles and purpose for him. Weak is the new strong. As we consider this passage for our own life, reflect and consider, what is or has been your thorn? The Message Bible uses the word handicap for thorn. So what is the handicap that Satan has tormented you with in this fallen world? Is it a physical limitation? Chronic illness? Do you struggle with an addiction? Have you felt like you just don't quite measure up to everyone else? Are you prone to depression, loneliness, or have had thoughts of suicide? Do you bear the scars of an abusive past? Relationship burdens. How do we respond to those thorns that we have in our life? How do we usually see them? We don't usually see them as gifts, do we? We want to fix them. We want God to take them away. We usually are asking for God to remove it. Or sometimes we respond to our thorns like Linus. And Linus is Charlie Brown's friend. And Linus tells Charlie Brown this: I don't like to face problems head on. I think the best way to solve problems is to avoid them. That's a distinct philosophy of mine. But then Charlie Brown naively asks, but what if everybody was like you? What if everyone in the world decided to run away from their problems? And Linus retorts, well, at least we'd all be running in the same direction. But what about the Apostle Paul? How did he respond? He responds like all of us. He asks God to take it away. He has been pleading and praying for God to remove the thorn. The passage says at least 3 times. But you know what? God won't. God doesn't. And had Paul stayed there, focusing on his torment, he might have become bitter and angry at God. But instead, Paul surrenders himself and shifts his focus to God and not on his own circumstances. Paul comes to claim boldly, and I hope that we will understand as well, that God's grace is sufficient for all we need. His power is made perfect in our weakness. God shows his power when we are weak enough to need it. One commentator wrote that our weakness provides a platform to perfect God's power. The word power in Greek in this particular passage is dunamis, which means ability, can also mean ability. So we could say that when we are disabled, God is able. Weak is the new strong. Something else to note here. Paul seems to understand that God had a purpose for that thorn. He says that it was given to me to keep me from being conceited. Is it even possible for us to consider that our struggles, our thorns, are opportunities for God to deal with our pride? And this is another temptation we fall into in our spiritual life because of our culture. We tend to live life as if we are in control. We tend to hold God at a distance, and we only reach out to ask for his help when we need him, when we're really in trouble. We have too often bought into this American ideal of individualism, which says that we can do anything we put our mind to. We just pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, and here we go. And we're the ones responsible for our success. It's a lie. When it is more about us than it's about God, folks, we're dealing with pride. Ken and I have had some wonderful opportunities to travel to Honduras on missions trips. And one year I had an experience that I hope will highlight this point about pride. I have always prided myself on being pretty physically strong for a girl. And pride is the operative word here. I like to work hard, but I also like it when others comment me and praise me for my hard work. You get my drift? On this particular trip to Honduras, our team was breaking ground for a new school and digging the footings of the school by hand with pickaxes and shovels through red, hard clay out on a plateau that didn't have any shade. It was incredibly difficult work, and we did not make a lot of progress every day. But it was rewarding, and I was getting lots of pats on the back from the villagers on how hard this white girl could work. And after a couple of days, some of our team members had had about enough, and they bailed out on our project and made a choice to move to another project that was far less physical. I was angry about their choice, and I was critical, but I didn't tell them directly, of course. I didn't confront them. Instead, I used an evening devotional to communicate my judgment. Sorry, Lord. Why couldn't they be more like me? Why couldn't they stick it out? However, the very next day, I became extremely ill. I lost all of my bodily fluids, everything. I tried to take the prescription for diarrhea but it was already too late. I couldn't hold down water. I couldn't even lift my head off the bed. I have never been that sick. I really didn't think, and I don't think Ken thought either, that I was leaving Honduras. As I prayed during that time, God showed up in a very powerful way to touch me with his presence, but he also spoke to my heart, addressing my attitude and my pride. He reminded me that the trip was not about what I could do in that week. It was about him. His power and love were going to be demonstrated in that village with or without me. And when I was gone, he would still be at work completing his mission. It was humbling, and it still is. The illness was a thorn that was sent by God to address my pride. In my weakness, I was more able to clearly hear God's voice. Eventually, they were able to find a nurse in a village nearby with an antibiotic shot that gained me enough strength to be able to make the trip home back to the U.S. I do believe that sometimes our thorns are sent by God to address our self-sufficiency and our pride. Weak is the new strong. The Apostle Paul received the truth that God's grace is enough and his power will be made perfect in his weakness. And this is a key thing for a key principle for God's kingdom. The strength of God's kingdom is built on the foundation of weakness. Just look to the cross. In the second passage that we read this morning, we're told that Jesus was crucified in weakness, yet he lives by God's power. In 1 Corinthians chapter 1, we read, "The message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise, and God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong." And in Philippians 2, we hear Jesus set aside his divinity and humbled himself, making himself nothing, taking on the very nature of the servant, being made in human likeness and obedient to death, even death on a cross. And on that cross, Jesus became weak so that we might be saved and experience his power. This is what Paul comes to understand, and he passes on to us today. Paul goes on to say, "Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weakness." Why? So that Christ's power may rest on me. I will delight in weakness, insults, and hardships and persecutions. Why? For God's grace is enough. And in chapter 13, he tells us likewise, we are all weak in him, yet by God's power we will live with him to serve. Alexander Maclaren, a 20th century Scottish preacher, said this: "Don't seek to be an iron pillar. Iron pillars are not useful to God. Seek to be a broken reed, because God uses broken reeds." But who wants to be a broken reed? We would prefer, right, that God minimize our weakness and magnify our strength. But in God's kingdom, we are learning that everything is set upside down and turned on its head. Weak is the new strong. So what's our takeaway? How will it impact us and the way that we would live our life out as we leave these walls? I want you to first consider embracing and admitting your weakness. The Apostle Paul was honest and vulnerable about his struggles. And this was not the only place that he did that. In Romans 7, we hear that he talks about, he knows that he's doing not what he should do, and he wrestles with the sin in his life. And in another letter, he tells the Corinthians, I was weak and fearful and trembling. He admits that. We are too often afraid to share our sins and our struggles with others. We tend to put on a mask that says we're just fine, and we hide. We found that one of the most healing places in Christian community is in a small group. Ken and I have had both the gift of participating in and also leading, and most recently with a group of married couples as an encouragement. And in each of these groups, growth seems to happen when someone is vulnerable enough to admit their sin, and boom, it opens it up for people to share the opportunity to say, yes, you're not alone, I deal with that too. We need to be a place, church needs to be a place where people can come and be honest and open and admit their weakness. So I ask you to think about how you might have the opportunity to do that, to be a Christian community that allows people to be honest about their weakness. Finally, I would also like you to consider to ask God how he would take your weakness and use it for ministry and strength in his power, not yours. And this is what Paul did, right? Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses so that Christ's power will rest on me. Recently, I was reading in Hebrews 11, which is called the Faith Hall of Fame. It's a whole list of all these wonderful people of faith. And as I was reading, a sentence jumped off the page. After several descriptions of miraculous feats like shutting the mouths of lions, putting out flames, administering justice, escaping death, conquering kingdoms, God says this. He says this. Right after that, this is the line, whose weaknesses was turned to strength. Whose weakness was turned to strength. All those people surrendered their weakness, and God used it for strength. God has chosen over and over again to use jars of clay to show that his all-surpassing power is from him and not from us. I want you to consider some pretty incredible people that God has used to demonstrate his power as they offered their weakness. Chuck Colson. How many people know who Chuck Colson is? He's on the radio. He is the founder of Breakpoint Ministries. He's an advocate for the Christian worldview. You hear his talks all the time. But Chuck has a powerful ministry for God. In his former life, before Jesus, he was a famous politician. He was a part of Watergate. Got caught. So his powerful ministry is not because he was a famous politician, but because he's an ex-convict. Joni Eareckson Tada. Does anybody know who Joni is? Joni has used her thorn of tragedy, which she, in a diving accident, became a quadriplegic, to impact the lives of millions. She is also heard across the world on the radio as well. She herself recalls a transforming visit she had with Corrie ten Boom, who at the time of their visit, when Joni was visiting Corrie, Corey had suffered a stroke. So they were both paralyzed. And Joni writes this: I relive each moment with Corey. I recall how our eyes met as we were fed our cucumber sandwiches. Helpless, and for the most part dependent, I felt our mutual weakness. Yet I am certain that neither of us has ever felt stronger. It makes me think of the cross, a symbol of weakness and humiliation, yet at the same time, a symbol of victory and strength. A wheelchair can confine a body that is wasting away, but no wheelchair can confine the soul. God's grace is sufficient for you. My power will be made perfect in weakness. So as we leave here today, I challenge you to ask God how He will give you an opportunity to share your weakness and allow Him to release His power in you as you surrender that weakness for His strength. Weak is the new strong. Weak is the new strong. As a closing, I would like to share with you the prayer from an unknown Confederate soldier. He writes, I asked God for strength that I might achieve. I was made weak that I might be humble and learn to obey. I asked for health that I might do great things. I was given infirmity that I might do better things. I was asked for riches that I might be happy. I was given poverty that I might be wise. I asked for power when I was young that I might have the praise of men. I was given weakness that I might feel the need for God. I asked for all things that I might enjoy life. I was given life that I might enjoy all things. I got nothing I asked for, but everything I hoped for. Almost despite myself, my unspoken prayers were answered. I am among all people most richly blessed. Let us pray. Lord, as we look to you and in your word, we find these challenging principles, these beacons that guide our path of faith. Today, we have talked about what it means to be weak and to embrace that your grace is sufficient for us. Lord, I lift up into your arms this family of God, and I pray that they can embrace this challenge, that they will discover that even though they are weak, as they surrender that weakness to you, you will lay your perfect strength upon them and use them in a powerful way to reach others. The world is hurting, and it needs your power and your grace, Lord. Speak to us in a way that we may serve and love you and embrace our weakness so that you may be made strong. In your name we pray. Amen.